Good evening. I would like to welcome everyone to the Kent City Council meeting for Tuesday, April 7th of 2020. This meeting will be conducted remotely given the stay-at-home, stay healthy order that's in place. All council members and staff are joining us remotely this evening. With the meeting called to order, Kim, could you please call the roll?
Mayor, I have all council members present and accounted for.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on in the agenda, item number 3 is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from council, administration, or staff?
None from administration.
All right, seeing none, a motion would be in order to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. All right, we are going to move on to item number 4, which is public communications. The first item under public communications is recognition. So given where things are at, any good news that we can share, I think, is extremely important. Tonight, I am very proud to announce our April 2020 Employee of the Month. I do believe he is listening in on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and read a short bio, talk a little bit about Employee of the Month, and then we can all congratulate him. So our Employee in the Month is chosen by employees here at the city. It is a peer selected recognition for outstanding work, whether it be on a major project or just in the day-to-day accomplishments of a particular employee. And so with that, I would like to recognize Sean Gilbertson as our April Employee of the Month. Sean was hired May 6th of 2008 as the environmental scientist in Public Works Engineering Environmental Division. He was then promoted to his current position as the environmental supervisor in the same division on April 1st of 2013. Sean is responsible for supervising coordinators, inspectors, and technical and administrative staff in the specialized engineering area of environmental management and conservation. His duties include, but are not limited to, supervising and overseeing the environmental water quality programs, investigating and resolving environmental-related management studies. He also ensures that these specialized project designs and implementation follow all legal parameters. I want to say a big congratulations to Sean Gilbertson. Council, you know him well. He's presented in front of us multiple times. Sean's extremely passionate about the work that he does here for the city, both from an education perspective, but also that environmental protection side. Not only does he work in our habitat arenas, but with businesses as well as, in code enforcement. So a lot of different places where we can see Sean's exceptional work, and I'm very, very proud that he is an employee here at Kent and recognized by his peers as the April Employee of the Month. Okay, moving on in the agenda, we will go on to community events. Council President Troutner, do you have any events? My guess is probably not.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have no community events to share at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Before we move into the Economic and Community Development Report, I do want to share a proclamation. Generally, these are done in person at the council, and we've got someone on the end to accept them. There was a lot of conversation about this particular proclamation as to whether we should do it now or wait until things return to somewhat normal. And King County Sexual Assault Resource Center has asked that we move forward with the proclamation that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So I'm going to go ahead and read this proclamation. It's something that I believe deeply in. Former council member Dennis Higgins is the person that introduced me to King County Sexual Assault Resource Center and the important work that they're doing. And so I do want to honor him for the work that he does with them. And I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. Whereas in Washington state, 45% of women and 22% of men report having experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. And whereas the risk is even higher for people of color, refugees, immigrants, LGBTQ, and other marginalized community members. One recent study shows 94% of Native American women in Seattle report they have been sexually assaulted. And whereas in King County, more than 7,400 adults and children received specialized assistance from organizations with programming for sexual assault victims in 2019. And whereas demand for services to help survivors heal has increased significantly since 2016, reflecting the cultural shift that is taking place that has prompted many survivors who have remained silent to now speak up and seek the help they need to heal. And whereas King County is home to many organizations that provide culturally and linguistically specific services for survivors from various racial, ethnic, faith, and cultural communities, survivors who are immigrants and refugees, survivors who are LGBTQ, and survivors with disabilities. And these culturally specific services are critical to effectively respond to the specific needs and barriers many survivors face. And whereas negative impacts of sexual violence, trauma on women, men, children, and youth include fear, concern for safety, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, injury, and missed work or school. And whereas working together to educate our community about sexual violence, supporting the survivors when they come forward, speaking out against harmful attitudes and actions, and engaging in best practice sexual violence prevention works helps end sexual violence. Now, therefore, I, Dana Ralph, Mayor of the City of Kent, join advocates and communities throughout King County in taking action to prevent sexual violence by standing with survivors and proclaiming April 2020 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the City of Kent, and ask that we all strive to create a safer future for all children, young adults, families, and families in our communities. Want to encourage anyone that is in our listening audience tonight, if you are a victim of sexual violence, assault, or know someone who is, to reach out to King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. They are an amazing resource in our community, taking care of people, working through these issues and standing by the side of victims and helping them to become survivors. It's an amazing organization, and I'm very, very proud to present this proclamation tonight and support the work that they are doing. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to our Economic and Community Development Report. And joining us this evening is our Chief Economic Development Officer, Bill Ellis.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Nice to be here, I think, remotely. Good evening. I'm going to take a little bit more time than I would usually do with one of these updates. My first 7 slides will be sort of similar to something more normal, and then the remainder of my presentation, which should be significantly longer than my normal update, will address the crisis that we see ourselves in now from an economic standpoint. But to begin off, I would just like to first start with sharing with everyone that the second phase of the Ethos project has closed. So the fully envisioned concept will complete. There was some question of financing given all the changes and challenges nationally. And FNW is plunging ahead, and that's really great news for the city, and it means the full concept will be realized. On another project, on the Naden Avenue project, what we are doing right now is reviewing downtown design review of this rendering for the 136-room Hilton Garden Inn. We're still in the due diligence period. Some of our hoteliers have reported income revenue down 98%, which is quite alarming to this project and to all of the hospitality industry, frankly. But Braintree Development is seeking help, as many businesses are, and is continuing to take active steps through the permitting process and the negotiation of the development agreement towards realizing the project in Kent, realizing that by the time anything would be constructed, we believe we'll be in a very different situation economically. I will say, though, that the purchase and sale agreement is not closed because the development agreement is not finished. And I think some of our earlier discussions about this purchase sale agreement remaining open are now actually to the advantage of this project. Next slide. We have remained open in terms of our operations. We're keeping to issue and process permits. The permit center is closed to walk-in customers as we seek to protect staff, but all staff are working remotely from home. New permit applications are accepted only electronically. Resubmittals are accepted electronically or via parcel delivery. This has really been a Herculean effort of many departments, PC, IT, CS, and Matt, all scrambled to get electronics submittals up and running. So this crisis has moved the city of Kent forward at warp speed. We're now accepting the electronic submittal, something we didn't think we would get to until we were fully operational with the new permitting software, Amanda, a year from now. So this was a really large team effort, and a lot of the work of the last few weeks, even as the rules of construction have changed, we have continued to issue out permits. A couple of charts to show that next. One, new submittals for permits, as you can see, over the last month have slowed but not ceased. Our inspection requests have, as you would expect, gone down, as going in person for inspections is something we are still doing when essential. On the subject of permitting, I would like to talk about the Rally the Valley's land use recommendations now being in effect. Next slide, please. So early indications of that we're achieving some success to our objectives. Even in this really difficult period, we've received pre-applications, which is indication of a future project for flex manufacturing office space to be developed by a very well-noted development group, Prologis, one of the world's largest warehouse groups on West Valley Highway. This is a site we've never discussed with council before. It was unknown to me. It was unlisted. So that's pretty exciting. It would be a teardown of existing older buildings for this new project. We also see interest in a business relocating to Kent into our new I2 zone with the possibility to grow some highly significant retail direct-to-consumer sales attributes in addition to repair and refurbishment. This would never have been possible under the old code, but our opening up to use is allowing us to participate in pursuit of that business in the Industrial Valley. Sawdust Supply, which is a 10-acre plus site of lower value use, was on the market and is closing for on-spec industrial development in our I3 zone. And we've continued to be talking to Sigali Property Ownership about investments directly in Kent City Park space, Boeing Rock, in exchange for certain design code provisions being relaxed. I bring this up because all of the above demonstrate that the changes the council passed is not impeding real estate development. In fact, it's opening us up to new opportunities for revenue, both from construction of new buildings, but also for new types of uses that we would never have seen otherwise. So I'd like to say that that is working one weekend. One of the things that we identified in the Rally the Valley process, and I'll come back to this probably in future weeks, was a loophole in B&O tax on square footage. Currently, the way it's written, we only address square footage of operations within 3 walls. There's a lot of very large business operations that have a quite considerable impact on city infrastructure that exists beyond the 3 walls of the warehouse, transloading operations, for instance. And in the future, I think as we're looking at and continuing with some of the goals of Rally the Valley to optimize our land use space for revenue collection, we'll need to revisit that. So that concludes my somewhat business as usual remarks. And now I want to address the invisible enemy that we all face. Next slide, please. So we have something of an unprecedented economic shock on our hands. This is a chart of weekly unemployment insurance claims in the country over the past 50 years. Not a lot of charts that you look at will show a spike quite like that, where you are 6, 7 orders of magnitude greater than anything previously seen. So this is quite one of the reasons why there's so much uncertainty, even among some of the greatest minds in economics, as to what this means for the next few months. Just another look at the same thing, but a little bit different. Next slide, please. Is the unprecedented national job loss. We're looking over 10 million jobs. So in that gray area, you see the labeled recession that was known as the Great Recession, which we've all experienced. If you sort of imagine for a moment stacking up all of those weekly unemployment claims on top of each other, they start to maybe over the course of a year and a half equate to a portion of what we saw in the last 2 weeks. And I think one of the things to note is that sort of the freeze on hiring that we're seeing is one of the silent killers of jobs here. beyond the layoffs, it's just that businesses are so uncertain. They're not hiring up people. There's been, yes, hiring at warehouses for distribution jobs, grocery stores, in the few 100,000 range, but that doesn't quite equate to the tens of millions of jobs that are now in jeopardy. In 2 weeks, I think what we're looking at here is something of an undercount, because this unemployment insurance diagram doesn't show the millions of people who have already exited the labor force. So next slide. I want to talk a little bit about more locally now, drilling down a little bit. So Kent jobs. On your right is a table from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, who's done an often quoted study here on how many, what percentage of the jobs nationally are at high risk of layoff due to essential stay-at-home type orders across the country. They estimated about 46% of the jobs. Using some of those same definitions, I looked at City of Kent jobs, and I've determined that we're considerably more at risk for layoff for the City of Kent jobs. We have 880 businesses in Kent that are restaurants, bars, apparel, hotels, furniture, other sort of in-person retail operations, or that's about 21% of all City of Kent's jobs. And then we have where the rules are a little bit more gray in wholesale trade, manufacturing, and construction, depending on how essential, that's another 920 businesses, or another 39% of all jobs. Of course, when you have that sort of systemic damage of other jobs in all other industries are, of course, entwined with that. So no one's really not at risk, but I think most at risk are at least 60% of Kent jobs. And next slide, please. Why is that? I would like to talk a little bit about the cash flow or small business cash reserves that most businesses have in hand. On the chart on the right, you see broken down by industry what the estimates are of the average or median business in the country for a cash buffer to deal with emergencies. You might have heard things like 80% of Americans don't have $400 at hand, cash in hand for household emergencies. Well, small businesses also have insufficient cash reserves to be closed for 4 to 6 weeks. Restaurants typically have 16 days worth of cash reserves. Wholesalers, 23 days. High-tech manufacturing, maybe up to 32 days. Experiences may vary by business, but unlike a hurricane, and this is similar to a disaster like a hurricane, this one will last months. The loss of revenue is different than when, let's say, there's an earthquake or a hurricane. For those who weren't directly destroyed, would be able to go back into business, go back to operating. This is for those less capital intensive businesses, which are also depend the most on in-person labor, really difficult to deal with. Next slide. So the amount of cash on hand varies by industry. So maybe there are some manufacturers who may have less cash on hand at a given moment than a restaurant. Personal services would typically have less, that's on the left hand, but you can see the variation with industry of how much cash is estimated on reserve by typical business very significantly. Far right hand corner portion of that graph, if it's hard to read, that's a high tech service. Then you have metal machinery manufacturing, healthcare, wholesale, reading right to left here, restaurant, real estate, construction, retail, and personal services on the far left. All this is to say that a business owner you may know might be having a different experience of what's happening right now. So generalizing can only go so far. This is also to say the reason why localities and states are looking so fixedly on the federal government right now. It's the only entity that has the financial firepower to match the loss of business revenue and to infuse it into companies. We were looking at the global economy essentially in free fall the last few weeks. And in many cases, economic activity was at a dead stop. Next slide, please. Drilling down back to Kent. This is a business survey that we participated in with Greater Seattle Partners. Some of the East Side cities that were earlier impacted, like Kirkland and Redmond, they did some of their own business surveying. We linked up with Greater Seattle, partly because we felt it's going to be important as things go on to be able to compare and contrast in a consistent manner to help direct regional and national relief efforts to local businesses. We didn't want to duplicate also proliferation of surveys at a time when businesses will be inundated with all sorts of information. And so we emailed this out directly to not only our fellow colleagues, to our chambers, to our business trade associations. We also did a direct email blast to 4,000 Kent businesses. This is just the first of what is planned to be several surveys. When this began, the governor's order wasn't in place. When it ended March 31st, the full impacts hadn't been realized, so there's some limitations. However, the survey results here are actually in line with the preceding slides information about 2/3 of Kent businesses being impacted. What you see there in the corner, lower left-hand corner of your screen, current layoffs, 104 businesses reported, no, we have not reduced staffing. The other 2/3 of businesses reported that they had. 38% said they had concerns about paying rent. 30% said they were unable to. Lack of cash reserves was the number one unsurprising concern, 159 of the businesses. And you can see the respondents by industry varied, but not dissimilar to the profile of what type of companies that we have in the Valley. If anything, wholesale is probably underrepresented in the survey and manufacturing a little over. So 2/3 of business owners are in trouble immediately based upon this response. Now the response rate, which is over 7%, you probably want closer to 20%. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of barriers to doing this kind of survey work. And again, we're going to look to do more in the weeks to come. Next slide. So to the unprecedented need, I want to shift to the unprecedented help. What we're looking at right now is the SBA emergency loan program is really the most important program that's now been, that already existed. To put it in a little bit of perspective though, in a typical year, the Small Business Administration receives 800,000 applications. First day of California's essential order to stay at home, they received 700,000 applications from the state of California in one day. So in the initial week, they had over 1 million and it crashed the system. The last few weeks, they've been, of course, working around the clock to revive the web portal to that. So for a lot of economic development at the local level is basically creating a fire brigade of information back to these web portals and to these application programs to help essentially put a lot of the business activity in the economy on the life support coming from the federal government. Next slide, please. So I want to highlight a few things that were in the federal CARES Act, the $2 trillion in direct fiscal spending, not including some of the additional liquidity that was made available to financial markets. And I think I want to underscore, this is not stimulus spending. This is just trying to preserve as much of businesses that we can nationally. They've put $350 billion, and there's talk this Thursday of putting an additional $250 billion into the SBA programs. There's been a lot in the press. I won't go over all the direct payments to American households. There is a surge of funding to the Community Development Block Grant Program that we haven't realized yet. The U.S. Economic Development Administration has got a surge of funding, which is relevant to us. That likely will be, our conduit there will be through Greater Seattle Partners. The director of Greater Seattle Partners is Brian McGowan, who used to be Deputy Director of EDA. Also to manufacturing extension partnerships like Impact Washington. I know they're working on a strategy, had some initial conversation about how we can help out there. And of course, help for city hospitals in crisis. And the funding that's come to cities comes through CDBG and HUD. So it's not direct relief for local governments. We haven't seen that yet. Next slide, please. So a lot of information here. What I want to distill it down to is they call them loans right now, but they're probably going to be forgivable. So get in line, apply anyways. Small business, as the feds have defined it, have always defined it, is fewer than 500 employees. Some of the very largest employers in Kent, 400, 300 employees. So this is going to cover the vast majority of businesses in Kent, with one or two notable exceptions like Amazon or Blue Origin. The system is far from ideal. There's no password recovery. If you start filling it out and you mess up, you have to start all over again with a new application. There's no way to recover your password. If you fill out something incorrectly, there's no way to check on the status of it and if it's worked or not. So I encourage people to keep applying. Don't be afraid to call and email for help. There's going to be a lot of information later on this presentation of who to call to ask for help. If you fear debt, you can refuse it after being accepted. So if you are worried about taking a loan, apply anyways. You can always refuse the loan later. And if the terms get even more attractive as the program changes and people are saying, yes, we're going to forgive these loans, there's a great chance you'll never pay these back. So you can decide to do that later. The cash advance that would come through the economic injury disaster loan is about $10,000. It should take 3 business days to fund after a successful application. I want to emphasize the word should. The loan would otherwise take 2 to 3 weeks to hear back from them, with funding a week later, because there's the automated process of the advanced loan, which is a $10,000, and then if there's additional amounts that you're requesting, you can see there you can borrow up to $2 million. That gets to a person, and the people are overwhelmed, although they're trying to ramp up capacity. There's another program called the PPP. I'll get to that in a moment. That's new, so we have no track record of how long that would take. Next slide, please. So SBA's working capital disaster loans come straight from the U.S. Treasury, no cost to apply. Please apply. Here's a couple of phone numbers and emails to help you advise you in that. These are based at 2 of the colleges that have locations in Kent. Green River College at Kent Station on the top, Highline College Small Business Development Center on the bottom, on the West Hill of Kent. Next slide. There's also local SBA affiliated banks. This is just a partial list of those closest to Kent. Not the physical proximity is the be all and end all at the moment, but these are the ones closest. We have a larger list on the City of Kent's business resource webpage. Next slide. Small business debt relief is another part of the CARES Act. This will provide immediate relief to small businesses. This is a Cliff Notes version. Contact your advisor for more information. The thing to note about this is if you choose the tax debt relief, actually, I'm sorry, next slide. If you choose the take tax relief, that means you're not eligible for the PPP brand new program. This basically delays payment of employer payroll taxes, and it also gives you a retention credit if you're experiencing economic hardship, which I think is safe to assume most are right now. Next slide, please. The Paycheck Protection Program is the most interesting and brand new program. This isn't just a helicopter drop, as they're calling it, of money through the usual SBA program. This was released and made available for applications on Friday morning. The rules for this were being written as people were applying for it. People are all across the country. We're in chat forums and email chains asking questions from businesses, and those questions would be asked up the chain and then brought back down the chain and kind of made up as they went along. So there's a lot of confusion about this, and we're not quite sure how it's going to work, but it's the way the federal government is trying to help businesses survive this period of enforced enclosure. So it's a loan designed to incentivize small businesses to keep your worker on the payroll. SBA will forgive loans if employees are kept on the payroll 8 weeks. People have asked, if I'm a business owner, I'm on my own payroll. Do I pay myself? Can I do that out of this? The answer is yes. You can apply also through the existing SBA 7A lender or federally insured depository institution. I'm going to talk about some of those others. There's a long list of this on our website. The preceding banks that I showed you all have affiliation with SBA, can do this as well. Next slide, please. These loans will be forgiven. So if you use it to keep your employees on, it's a loan that you don't have to pay. So it's not quite a loan. See it as a grant. They're just trying to get the money out the door as fast as they can to keep lights on, is what the federal government's trying to do right now. And on every single question where they could try to decide, should we, shouldn't we, they always err on the side of, let's make sure the money gets to the business. Loan has a maturity of 2 years, interest rate of 1%. Next slide, please. I want to highlight the work of a couple of CDFIs. These are community development financial institutions. The one on your left is the Business Impact North Washington Group. They've been hired by Startup 425 on the east side. They've been doing a lot of webinars. They have a great website full of resources and a team of business advisors specifically for coronavirus COVID-19 business support, as well as the SBA. In good times, they'd work with SBA a great deal. I think they're being looked to a lot more right now, sort of a leader on this. On the right, you have Craft 3, which is also another CDFI. They had actually been hired by King County recently, and I think under normal circumstances, I'd be talking about their plan to work with King County later this year the city's communities of opportunity groups on the East Hill of Kent and in Auburn to work on strategies to prevent displacement of low-income businesses. I don't know if that'll change what they do right now with all of this. It's probably too early to say, but they too have coronavirus impact information on their website and a team of advisors standing by in addition to the local college systems as small business development centers. Next slide. Philanthropic help. So in 72 hours, there was $27 million raised for a host of different causes related to coronavirus in Seattle. Through the Seattle Chamber, they made available some grants to small businesses. Michelle and I tried to get that out to as many businesses as we could. There was a little confusion early on. Were Kent businesses eligible? Isn't this the Seattle Chamber? Well, technically, no. The Seattle Chamber is also our ADO, which is a creature of the state Department of Commerce. They're for business retention work. So they've been routing money through them. And the philanthropic entity was also working with the local chamber. So there was a little bit of confusion there, and also confusion to the fact whether or not City of Kent businesses were eligible for City of Seattle CDBG originated small business relief, which they weren't. But this philanthropic effort, they were. So some Kent businesses did take advantage of this. The lottery, they're now in a lottery system for the next round of fundraising. 277 businesses applied basically in a couple of days and received $10,000 grants that were supposedly to help them comply with new health requirements. I think mostly it was to just try to keep the lights on again for a lot of businesses, help them pay down those fixed costs, and we're looking to see that re-raised again. Some of the organizers of this are now working on the East Side to do East Side Relief Fund, maybe with a different name that reduces confusion. They've reached out to South End Chambers, to myself. They're looking to do something similar in the South End. There is an effort underway at the Seattle South Side Chamber task force that I've been asked to participate in to raise money and replicate this in the South End. I think it's a little bit slowed at the moment because there wasn't an obvious place to go in the South End as there was on the East Side or in Seattle. Next slide. Facebook. Facebook's announced that they're going to make $100 million available nationwide, $8.5 million for Seattle area businesses for grant relief related to this. Applications will open April 11th. Right now, if you go on, you can just put in your email. Very little else explaining how that grant program will work yet, but something to note. And they have their usual sort of small business programs where they're now also trying to help encourage people to buy gift cards. Gift cards are in this crisis right now. One of the ways for restaurants and others to realize revenue in the door for use later and keep something going, even though no one can go use them right now. So State of Washington assistance. There's a great one-stop webpage. And I think one of the things early on with the fire brigade of getting the information out there, talked about it with SBA, SBDC, and others, is that there's sort of this multiplication of communication out to businesses, the chambers, the trade organizations, and people in a panic will start searching and seeing if there's any different information between any of the different sites, and is there something slightly better for help for me there, and it becomes kind of a desperate situation where an entrepreneur or a business owner could spend a lot of time trying to circle through all the different resources that are out there, looking for a little bit different if everyone's presenting in a little bit different way. So State Department of Commerce has tried to be that one-stop shop website. That's also, of course, on our webpage. The Governor's Strategic Reserve Fund grant program was under development. Today was announced the process for how you can access those funds. Just one last thing on the previous slide to talk about, the employment insurance program, mitigation of layoffs. So this is actually a really under-discussed program that's worked well in other recessions. It isn't through the Department of Commerce. It is a state program, though, and it's through the Employment Security Office. It's called the Shared Work Program, and I encourage people to check it out on that website. So basically, you could reduce your payroll 50% and have unemployment insurance take up the slack. This is a great way to keep valued employees on to weather the storm until you can maybe get back to producing revenue and bringing those people full time. Next slide. So back to the what was announced this afternoon by the governor's office. That $5 million is usually the Governor's Strategic Reserve Fund to help assist the recruitment of businesses into Washington State. A lot of years they've not been able to use it fully. Some years they use it to help retain businesses that are threatening to leave. This afternoon, they've repurposed all of it for businesses with 10 or fewer employees, and those grants are up to $10,000. Ashton Allison would be our local conduit, as I mentioned earlier, through the Seattle Chamber. He is the ADO. They will help administer it. So I know the Seattle Chamber, you're like, well, what's that relation to Kent? Well, through the state, they are the conduit for a lot of these programs. $10,000 will go pretty quickly statewide for those 10 or fewer employees. So we've been working to just get that information out. I do think there's a webinar tomorrow about some of the particulars of that or questions on that. So I look to get educated along with everyone else on any detailed questions on this program. I will say, though, that kind of underscores for me the disadvantage Washington State has over other states when it comes to state constitution prohibitions on public gifts of money to private enterprise is really kind of something that economic developers grouse about, and maybe the wider public doesn't talk about as much. But I think in this crisis has been really revealed. Next slide, please. So the favorite parlor game right now in all the business journals and amongst economists is, what's the recovery going to look like? Is it going to be a V where we go down real fast and then we come right up right again? Is it going to be a U where we go down in a precipitous way, we lull about there for a little while, and then we come right back up? Is it an L where we just drop down and that's the new low, is the new normal? Is it a W? Is it like a roller coaster? Every time there's another wave of pandemic, we go up and down, up and down. Or is it going to be a Nike swoosh which we're experiencing probably right now, is the going backward contraction of historic proportions, losing a lot of employees, losing a lot of businesses, losing a lot of productivity, and then we will go up a slow hill back to where we were. Truth is, nobody knows. There's too many variables. There's no way of telling. That doesn't mean we're powerless in this circumstance. It's worth thinking about, though, because a lot of what we need to be using this time for is thinking about what are the things we should be doing to grow again, because this won't be forever. How do we deal with what's coming next? So it's worth thinking about. But in the immediate, we're not powerless. The goal right now is, no matter what kind of recovery happens, we need to save as many businesses as we can now. So we're showing some flexibility to city and utility fees, which is good. The state's orders on evictions for commercial tenants and residential tenants is good. Voluntary efforts of landlords to be flexible on payments right now is great. Community helping to buy gift cards, order takeout is great. And if you know how to go through the SBA loan program, or you just experience it yourself, checking in on your peers in the business community and helping them go through it, those are the kinds of things right now that we need to be doing to ensure whatever the recovery looks like, as many of us are participating with it as soon as they can right now. Next slide. So Michelle covered some of these on her presentation to community as a whole the other week, so I'm not going to go as much over it, other than to say that the City of Kent is working with its consultant group at JRA and is trying to be maximum flexible with them, but doing that in sort of an educated, informed manner to look at some short-term strategies. Next slide. We spent a lot of time in the early week trying to, behind the scenes and on our initiative to work social media to create a restaurant directory for takeout, other tools. We're now looking at how we can push more social media gift card buying. Next slide. Visit Kent, of course, has been updating itself on travel advisories and tourism. Next slide. And we're looking at some longer term strategies for hospitality and retail recovery. You might recall that some months ago I talked about, hey, this is the first year we're going to have a Kent Restaurant Week. Well, I think that's actually still a good thing to do, and so do some people who are organizing that with us. But just we're going to maybe think about how we're going to rebrand that as Restaurant Recovery Week later in the year. Next slide. So Kent Economic Development Allies and Neighbors. We've been in communication with these entities, getting updates, talking, sharing practices, what's going on, hearing what they're doing. The King County Business Public Health Task Force actually is also responsible for like White Center and some of the unincorporated areas economic development. They've been doing a lot of translation of services of what's available and distributing that in the more recent days. although early on they were more interested in trying to see compliance with the public health orders. Next slide. This is a list of some of the trade association responses we've seen. Our friends at AFA have been doing a lot of online resources, webinars, digital newsletter, PNAA, similar, but also a weekly Zoom meeting, camps, besides all the calls for PPE, that's protective equipment, have been doing online resources, peer-to-peer networking, Impact Washington, similarly in discussions about the Defense Production Act, et cetera, are also putting together it's due to me, shared with me in a draft form later this week, their plan for recovery for manufacturing. They've been offering free business assessments, PNDA, which is the Pacific Northwest Defense Association, online resources, a digital town hall a few days ago, peer-to-peer resources, and Women in Manufacturing probably did the thing that I like the most, the Wine with Us Wednesdays in the evenings. So next slide. More locally still, Kent Downtown Partnership's been putting out a webpage of who's still open. It was interesting before the governor's orders hit, talking to Gayla some weeks ago. She said actually the number of people going to local businesses had increased as people were not wanting to travel as much. I'm sure that's changed now. She's helped distribute the impact survey, do the online restaurant directory, work to do a webinar with some of their membership with Green River's SBDC advisor, Kevin Grossman. Kent Chamber also has a webpage out on emergency resources. They did a webinar with state elected officials, or will be doing one rather. Next slide. Our other chamber, Seattle Southside Chamber of Commerce, has created a Southside Mitigation Recovery Task Force. We're trying to promote some of their webinars as well that go through how to apply for SBA and FEMA grants and other important tools at this time. Those videos, once posted, remain up on their webpage. They're also trying to repurpose their existing 501c3 foundation to do something similar to All In Seattle. We're interested in trying to assist in those efforts. Of course, they would help Kent businesses and all businesses south of Seattle. A lot of feedback that people feel new to someone, and again, going back to the idea of a fire brigade, or the idea that we are trying to stem every loss that we can right now. It's important to try to reach new people. And one of the things I worry about the most, actually, are the businesses that weren't really internet savvy beforehand or weren't online. Next slide, please. So we're still in the middle of the storm. Early indications are that this recession will make the one in 2008 seem trivial. Why do I say that? I read alarming things like, half of humanity or a third of humanity are currently ordered to stay indoors. Seismographs all over the world are noticeably quieter because of the reduction in economic activity. This is going to be an unprecedented shock to people's budgets and balance sheets. And our city has two most important industries, or highly concentrated, are global trade and aerospace. And it's really hard right now to predict what the scale of the impact will be or how enduring. What will air travel, Port of Seattle is saying that air traffic right now is down 86%. How quickly does that recover? What does it look like? What does the demand for airplanes look like in a year? I'd be lying if I said I knew, because the best minds in all these businesses don't really know right now, other than to know it's going to be very significant. Talk to some experts in supply chain and logistics. They think already this is way more significant than 9/11. Obviously more significant than the global trade wars that were occurring over the last year or so. So we're uncertain how many businesses can be saved by the federal lifelines that are being extended, although it's urgent that we assist businesses to take it. And I think it's a safe assumption that demand is just not going to spring back the moment the governor's orders are removed. I guess the analogy that I like best that I've seen about this is, imagine you are in a traffic jam at JBLM, and the accident, the construction has been lifted, but still an hour before you get moving again. Just imagine that traffic jam is 100 miles long, and that's kind of how you go from a complete stop in the economy to back to rolling again. Next slide, please. So responses in the next 30 days, next 120 days. So I would say, first off, over the previous 30 days, we've worked to try to establish new ways of communication, new ways of operating. We are trying to, first and foremost, get behind what I see as the front line, which is SBDC, CDFIs, get the word out on resources, try to support what they're doing or what they are best trained and best able to do. We're trying to work with the other chambers, trade associations, industry experts over the next 30 days to set up additional sector-specific webinars. morning communication with Seattle Southside Chamber and Kent Chamber about this, lining up other speakers for subjects like retail and ICSC, logistics with the Global Trade Center of Excellence at Highline College. It's probably too early to do manufacturing because they're still so in the national crisis and effort. But in the weeks ahead, when we probably will still be indoors, doing some online town halls is probably the thing to do. So over the next 30 days, and this is basically the International Economic Developers textbook, what to do in a disaster, a normal one, assess the damage, listen to business owners, and then continue to advocate for those things that are going to most reduce economic impact over the long run. And I think a lot of that comes down to some of the shared sacrifice and shared purchasing of gift cards and takeout and all those little things that we can all do together. Next slide. How is it changing the work program for your economic development division? Well, prior to this, I was really focused on lining up market and public sector interests in North Naden. What I've been really focused on the previous 2 years was sort of a Kent Valley pivot where we were trying to unlock marketing resources from the lodging tax, which of course is a little bit in doubt right now what the future lodging tax revenues will be, and try to build a network for promotion of Kent Valley, which we're relying on now is to be plugged in to what's happening. We overhauled land use regulations and standard for Kent Valley, and I think that's working out per my earlier slide in this discussion. And my next focus actually with the Port of Seattle money, which was a $32,000 match to $65,000 from the Port of Seattle, which is safe and from Port of Seattle budget cuts this year, although Port of Seattle did trim significantly, was to take the next steps on growing the AJAC Training Center's presence in Kent and realize new partnerships with additional Kent businesses and try to bring flexible training to the incumbent worker. Post-COVID-19, all of these things are now in flux. I think my immediate priority is to continue, as I keep saying, business mitigation, coalition response to mitigating the harm to businesses. Secondarily, how do we take the federal funding that's coming as soon as it's available and try to stand up small business programs that help those most in need in Kent? I think we need to reevaluate our North Naden strategy. It's fluid. All my early conversations with developers so far is that people aren't giving up their projects that they were in. They were in their PSA mode. They were in the due diligence, especially in Midway and other places. Now they're not so confident. They've been very, some of them distressed at how fragile the global economy actually was. But that doesn't mean they're abandoning their projects. They're just kind of pausing them. And I feel like we should be in a similar mode, or how we think about the selling of North Naden. The dust hasn't settled. We're still in the middle of the storm. It's too early to say what the right thing to do is or what the opportunity is on North Naden. And then we also have to spend this time doing some recovery planning. Next slide. So, you know, what does the Junior Woodchuck economic developer textbook professional guidance say? It says keep to your long-range efforts. Those are going to be really important going forward. As I mentioned earlier, it's participate in stage forums so we can not to presume what businesses need in this moment, but try to create ways or encourage or facilitate business-to-business mentoring activities like a lot of our trade association partners are. Try to add value by organizing them with agendas that drill in deeper. This would be post the mitigation efforts, post getting the SBA information out into people's hands, and then saying, all right, what do we do next? And then we, as we are doing right now, we're aligned with what the regional federal disaster recovery efforts are to try to reach as many people as we can. On the identified key vulnerabilities to the Kent's local economy, a lot of our work is performed in closed quarters with others. So it's hard, as one factory owner told me, it's hard to kind of build parts remotely. They were staying open. They were considered essential defense, although they were having supply chain problems with circuit boards from Asia. Major services aimed at micro enterprises and our multicultural communities, our low-income businesses, they're not as embedded as I've ever liked them to be. Ventures tried to do some things in Kent and pulled back. Start Zone was at Highline College, which was really focused on immigrant and refugee businesses, but had some turf issues in years past and never quite built out the full suite of services in Kent. And now there's this CAF3 program. I think that's a vulnerability for us because having things translated or people who aren't on internet, not having those services in place is a weakness for us, but we can work on in the months ahead. Next slide. And one of the resources that will probably be coming our way for that is community development block grant. There'll be significant increased funding there. So in partnering internally with that other department and parks, human services, to work with, by the way, NDC is the National Development Council, which is based, has an office here. I was meeting with them on other issues just a few weeks ago. They're based in Seattle. They would be hired by King County to work with Craft 3. As I mentioned, small business grant programs. This is what City of Seattle was able to do, is take the excess CDBG that they had. We didn't have excess CDBG, but if we had, I think it would make a really good use for it to do micro enterprise granting. Something that is interesting to think about, and it would be early, we have to know how much money we would receive, but a revolving loan fund is something you can do with CDBG. It kind of skirts the usual state restrictions. Because it is federal money, you can actually lend it out. We're not usually allowed to lend public money to private businesses, but something we did when I worked in Oregon routinely to great success out of the Community Development Department in the city of Eugene in Oregon. Having something like that in Kent would be fantastic. The Economic Development Administration doesn't come through HUD. They have more increased funding. So as I mentioned earlier, our conduit there will be Greater Seattle Partners for stimulus type investments, capital projects. So when it comes to that federal agency, having the capital resources of surplus property that can match to an EDA grant is sort of the classic move to work with that agency. And they've just gotten a few $1 billion extra at the federal level. But of course, we'll be competing with a lot of other people for similar type projects in the months ahead. So again, a lot of work to do still with Greater Seattle Partners to realize that once we figure out what they're going to use that money for at a federal level. Next slide. Some medium-term ideas. CAMPS, Center for Advanced Manufacturing Puget Sound, over the years has already worked to get as many of their aerospace companies who have a high degree of rigor and testing and quality control, get them into the medical device markets. That seems like a prescient, well planned out project of theirs over the years now. Coming out of this, how do we support acceleration of this diversification out of aerospace into a big bucket? We were pretty diversified as a manufacturing base to begin with, which was showing us up pretty well during the 737 MAX issues, but I think going forward, it wouldn't hurt to be yet more diversified. AJAC was working to build a pipeline. I already mentioned this. How do we try to reposition the money that we had still with AJAC, but in a larger strategy at a state level for manufacturing? And then I had already mentioned about the fact that the city also needs to take care of itself and make sure that it can participate fully in economic recovery. And that's going to take some adjustments perhaps to B&O on square footage tax. Next slide. So a lot of things I come and talk to council about, whether it's automation or e-commerce changes, I think all these existing trends are just accelerated at light speed by this crisis. And then there's a lot of other things that are completely uncertain to me and to everybody else. We built a lot of our strategy around marketing about bringing business conferences to Kent as a way of sort of subtly expanding our brand to other to those who need to know. That's sort of undermined at the moment, obviously, business conferences. Entertainment and tourism, you know, having owning the Accesso Shower Center is a little bit undermined at the moment. Retail, e-commerce, you know, having an online presence, customer relationships are really important. I think one of the difficult things we've noticed for KDP membership is a lot of them didn't have any online presence before then. Gail has been reaching out to them, bringing social media companies to them to try to develop that now. But I wish that, you know, wish that was a little bit taken a little bit earlier. But one thing, you know, just as an analogy here, I've talked to council over the years about even a few percentage switch in market share from brick and mortar to online led to Macy's, Sears, big boxes all across the nation shuttering and putting plywood up in the windows. So what will the changes in consumer behavior from telecommuting and other things do for retail? What will it do for restaurants is just a big question mark. Supply chain and logistics and manufacturing, one thing we can know for certain is that this will hasten automation and it will shift to lower risk posture for big companies to try to regionalize supply chains and bring more manufacturing on shore. On the other hand, cross-cutting to us is the diminished demand for air travel that is likely from the dampening appetite for travel for the foreseeable future. Next slide. I've already mentioned a little bit about some of the purchase and sale agreements and movement that was going on in Midway all around the surplus property that I will be a staff person to in those discussions with Sound Transit. They're continuing their process for those surplus properties. Just looking at the private market around there, they're just full of question and ambiguity right now. So I wonder if it would behoove us to take a pause. Naden, thankfully, we are in this sort of open-ended due diligence process right now, so that timing is working well for us. But on the northern portion of the site, might want to think about pausing for a little bit. Next slide. One thing else I can say for certain, that the economic recovery will be uneven. A lot of the knowledge-based jobs that can be done remotely, those industries are going to weather better. Obviously, logistics, which we do have a good stake to, this is to the plus column for Kent. There's a short-term boom in delivery and warehouse jobs. Warehouse space is still viewed as a relatively safer place to invest, and with equities and bonds and other things becoming more questionable, one thing that people aren't questioning is the need for warehouse distribution space close to big cities. So I think we've made some good measured choices there so far, and we've seen some continued demand from that sector. In-person services and hospitality, we talked about that ad nauseum. The American economy is a very consumer-focused, but Kent Valley, a little bit counter to the country as a whole, is a little bit more export-oriented. So it's kind of it's really difficult to project right now how we're going to fare better than the rest of the country. And I won't do that, but to say one thing is certain, those with less savings and less skills are now most at risk. And we have seen reports in this state and every state in the country right now that there's a soaring demand for food bank, demand on our food banks. And that's kind of an leading indication of the hurt that is out there. Last slide. Wanted to do something a little bit more optimistic for my last slide here. History is guide. About 100 years ago, the Spanish flu influenza epidemic, those cities that took the more draconian measures to knock down death in their communities, actually, there was a study just released on the 30th of March of this year saying those cities did the best in economic recovery compared to other American cities. And so far, what it sounds like is Washington State is doing a decent job at flattening the curve. So that speaks better for us coming out the other side of this in terms of economic recovery. Lastly, just want to thank everyone. I want to open myself up to questions. Our business resource page is up there. Just want to also leave the links and emails and phone numbers of our local SBDC centers. They're willing to help you, and if you're a business listening to this, and so am I, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much for that extremely comprehensive presentation. There's so much going on. I just want to share with council and the community, first, a very heartfelt thank you to our Economic and Community Development Department. Both Michelle and Bill have been working around the clock to compile these resources, be engaged in the conversations at the city and regional level to make sure that we are doing everything we can in this these unprecedented times to not only protect our employers, but that in turn helps protect our residents, because without jobs, then none of those basic needs can be met. So I just want to say that I'm extremely grateful for the work that's being done. I can also share with you that this really is an around-the-clock effort. Sunday night, I received an email from a business and thought, I'm going to go ahead and forward this on to Bill right now. It was 10 o'clock Sunday night, and within minutes, I had an extensive reply from him. So I can tell you that this is an around-the-clock effort. I have some questions from council. I'll start with Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Mayor. And Bill, thank you for this presentation. The one thing I am hearing from business owners is, on top of all the angst it is, that there's so much information out there and they are doing sort of that resource surfing. So this is a great presentation to just consolidate a lot of those resources and give them a place to start. So I can't thank you enough for that. One thing the other thing I'm hearing is a lot of the self-employed, the stylist, the massage therapist, the individual consultant. And I'm not, there seems to be a lack of resource or understanding of what programs they apply for, even nationally. Is that still an area that's sort of being worked out for those self-employed individuals?
I think they're eligible for everything I discussed, and
Okay.
including the thing that came out from the governor's office today. I think it's just unfamiliarity with these resources, and they're being so fresh to so many people for the first time. And that's sort of the unfortunate weakness we have going into this unprecedented crisis as a nation and also locally. All of this is eligible for them. They should never hesitate to reach out to the names and numbers that are up there if they have further questions. But every one of these programs are also for them. And the government program announced today is as well.
Super, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from council?
Madam Mayor, Bill Boyce, how you doing?
Good evening.
Hey, question is, I'm not clear on what role the chamber is playing and how we working with them. I see them having a big role in all of this. There's so much information. And number two is, we have a couple of businesses that have shut down and can't because of what's going on in our environment today.
On the chamber point, Councilmember Boyce, Ken Chamber, we've been talking to them. They've been trying to get out the same information everyone else is to their membership. I think they are looking to do some fundraising for philanthropic relief for businesses. So are the other chambers, and they're having discussions about how to collaborate best to do that I'm a part of. And we're talking about how do we do some more value add information that isn't duplicative in the weeks ahead. And I'm sorry, could you repeat your second question about closure of businesses? I just want to make sure.
And we have in the business and can't impact it by.
Oh yes, yeah.
But
No, I don't know how many precisely yet, though. Unfortunately, I don't have all the warn notices from the WDC, although I've asked for them. And warn notice means warning for layoffs. One of the very first to announce 200 layoffs and that they were closing that I was aware of was Harbor City Distribution, which was a food distribution to restaurants. As soon as these orders hit in March, they let go 200 folks and closed shop. I don't have a full accounting for how many have closed at this point. We're trying to, of course, survey and research that and want to do that collaboratively with our chambers. We won't have full information, unfortunately, until June, probably, and other than what we hear. And so we're still in a kind of uncertain time on the data piece of how many and who exactly. So that's why I try to remain in communication with the chambers.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Council Member Fincher.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bill, I'd be interested in hearing more about what you were saying about using the CDBG funds, what some of the possibilities would be. Also, what would not get done if we were to take that? How would that work? And I don't know if you're prepared to talk about that now, or if we would have to talk offline or what.
I can answer to my best of my ability at this time. I mean, we know that the federal government passed a whole lot of additional funding for CDBG. We don't know how soon that will arrive in the city. We don't know what the rules will be around using it. But I will say for those cities that had not obligated all those funds, and we typically obligate all of our funds to social services and nonprofits who will also need this funding. So we weren't going to just, sort of rob Peter to pay Paul with those funds. But with an influx of funding, what we would most likely want to do is grant, similar to what the state of Washington did for those businesses that have 10 or few employees, try to spread it to as many businesses as we can at, up to $10,000. That would be an early idea, and that would just be simply trying to relieve the pressure. But I don't know if will be the smartest thing to do by the time the money finally arrives. We'll have to see. Revolving loan fund is another use of money where you provide low interest loans for micro enterprises or for individuals or businesses that otherwise couldn't achieve equity. We used to do those in Oregon. We call them sometimes character loans because we wouldn't necessarily require the same securitization. We required some securitization, but not the same that a bank would. So it enabled us to help a lot of businesses that otherwise wouldn't have access to the capital that they needed. And that's a good use for what we call micro enterprise, or those very small businesses, less than 10 employees. So those would be early targets in trying to help to those most in need. We know, again, all I know at this stage is that the federal government has passed more money for CDBG. Any other particulars as to how HUD's going to release that to us or how much is too early to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council members, any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again, Bill, for that report, to both you and Michelle for all the work that's being done with our business community.
Thank you.
I'm extremely grateful for that work at this time.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Okay, we are going to move on in the agenda to reports from council and staff. I will start with my report. Want to provide a little bit of information to the community about a conversation and some information I received over the weekend. Saturday, I had a pretty lengthy phone conversation with Thomas Reynolds, who is the director of Northwest Harvest. If you're not familiar, Northwest Harvest has a large warehouse here in the city of Kent. And the service that they generally provide are to ship pallets out to individual food pantries around the region. And because of the fact that most of those food pantries are staffed by volunteers, a lot of them elderly, they're seeing a crunch in resources and being able to pass out that food. So most food bank models are that of stocking shelves and then allowing the customers, the visitors, to come and basically shop. And that model does not work given our current social distancing requirements. So the Northwest Harvest, working with several other organizations similar to themselves in the state, have combined their efforts, and they're sending out emergency food boxes. So they're preparing them ahead of time to contain a variety of different food types. That requires extra work up front on the part of Northwest Harvest. So they had reached out to the Department of Agriculture and asked for some help. And in response to that, the National Guard has been deployed to the city of Kent. So I want to, first of all, make sure that our residents know why they're here. The Guard is coming to help Northwest Harvest prepare those boxes. It looks like at this point, they're going to be doing about 7,000 boxes a week and shipping them out to areas in South King County and Central and Southwest Washington. So very, very grateful for that response. We know that probably by the end of this crisis, we're looking at nearly 2.5 million Washingtonians being food insecure, which is a staggering number. Without the help of places like Northwest Harvest and quite honestly, the National Guard, we would not be able to meet that demand. So look for more information coming out of both Northwest Harvest and our office in the coming week about the programs and services that they're providing. But just want to let people know that the National Guard did deploy to Northwest Harvest starting yesterday, and they are here to help provide food services for our residents in this time of need. As in addition to that, the rest of my report, I can tell you that in our office here, it is COVID all day, every day. We are working with all of our residents, our business partners, and regional partners to make sure that we can keep everybody updated, managing all the things that are changing at a very, very rapid pace with our current situation. So just want to urge our residents to watch our Facebook page, Twitter feed, and social media. As things change, we're doing our very best to keep you updated. With that, I am going to turn it over to our Chief Administrative Officer, Derek Matheson.
Right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My written report is in the packet, and I know council members have been receiving copies of my emails to our workforce about COVID-19. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And we have no executive session this evening.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Council President Troutner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We had our first ever remote workshop today with 2 presentations. The first was an update on the federal weight link extension, which will take riders from the Federal Way Station to the Angle Lake Station in about 12 minutes. The project will be completed in 2024, and in the meantime, there are a lot of meetings happening on a weekly basis. There will be some really great attributes included in this project. We saw some slides today that brought both the Kent Des Moines Station and the Star Lake Station to life. They will have a pedestrian plaza, lots of areas for weather and wind protection, safer areas for bus riders and people being picked up at the station. And then moving forward, there are things that are happening now and things that will be beginning soon, like permitting, demolition, soil remediation, utility work, midway landfill, waste removal, heavy construction, and then in the last year, they will do a bunch of testing with the completion again in 2024. We also had a presentation on the sewer relining by our Public Works Department. And although this sounds like a very messy job, it is really interesting. The crews use a felt lining, resin, and steam to reline deteriorating sewer lines. Sewer lines deteriorate because of buildup of fats, grease, oils, and root intrusion. Relining has many benefits, including cost savings and bringing new life to existing pipes. Moving on, my regional committees have been canceled, so I don't have any information at this time, but I will turn to my colleagues for reports and information that they have to share. And like we rotate our reports during council meetings, I'm going to start with Council Member Michaud.
Thank you, Madam President. So I serve on the Regional Water Quality Committee, and we have not had a meeting this year. However, I did receive an email, and it contains an issue that I need the council's opinion of. So several members of the Regional Water Quality Committee are asking the King County Council via Dow Constantine to reconsider his draft increased wastewater treatment fees. They're asking that no rate increase happens in 2021 or that there's a more reasonable rate proposed because the initial proposal rates that everyone was kind of thinking was going to be 4.5%. Instead, the percent is 9.5% increase for this wastewater treatment rate to go up by 9.5%. And basically, the committee was not brought in on this. And so they're just asking that the process is more collaborative and transparent and maybe hopefully reconsider the rate increase. So I'm just asking if council members are okay with me signing that letter asking for those changes.
When do you need to have information back to your committee?
Preferably by Thursday.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time because I know some of us just got this information.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And that's all I have.
All right, moving on, Council Member Kaur.
Thank you. All three regional committees that I serve on did not meet during this time, so I do not have any updates at the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Boyce.
There we go. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hey, I don't have anything to report out. I guess I have a question for the mayor. I'm just any update with the Echo Lodge. I saw the chief on TV last night. He did a phenomenal job, and I like the fact that we are keeping pressure on. Anything else new you want to share around that, Mayor?
Thank you, Council Member Boyce. So what I can share with you is that we are in continued conversation with the county, working with members of the executive staff to try and maintain open communication so that we are aware of what's happening. It's as you can imagine, a very fluid situation. So we are doing our very best and committed to partnering with the county on this. And as we receive updates, we'll make sure to push those out to the community. But trying our very best to keep those lines of communication open.
I think we're getting a lot of traction around this even more. So I think the chief did a phenomenal job, really, just talking about people just running free. And, a lot of people begin to, based on what's going on, and this stuff is getting worse and worse. I think we get some traction on it. So I just think we just got to keep putting the pressure on, where it's coming from you or coming from the chief or whoever. I think we just need to kind of don't ease up on them and keep holding them accountable. So thank you for that.
Yep, absolutely. We will keep those lines of communication open.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Thomas. All right.
All went well. Oh,
Nope.
hello now, am I on?
You are on, go ahead.
No? Oh, the next meeting will be to be determined. And that's all I have.
All right. Councilmember Fincher.
All meetings were canceled and we don't know when we will have the next one.
All right, thank you, everyone. That ends our reports.
Actually, you missed me.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Larmer, you're
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I actually, so this Friday, I'll be having a telemeeting, a remote meeting with the Aging and Disabilities Advisory Council, and we'll be hearing from Public Health again. So I should have something to report at our next meeting. And then affordable housing was postponed. We'll be meeting again May 15th.
All right, I apologize, Madam Mayor. That ends our reports.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, with that, we are going to move on in the agenda. Item number 6 is a public hearing. We do not have one this evening. Item number 7 is where we usually have public comment, and we are asking the public that during this coronavirus emergency, if you have public comment you would like to provide to the council, that you send those comments directly to the council at citycouncil@kentwa.gov, or call 253-856-5700 to provide that comment. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. This is a compilation of work that the City Council has done via the Committee of the Whole over the past several weeks. They've had presentations on. It is moved out of Committee of the Whole without significant or any controversy. So at this point, Council President Troutner, do you have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to approve consent calendar items A through L.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, consent calendar passes 7-0. We do not have other business or bids tonight. As you heard from Derek Matheson, we do not have an executive session. At this point, we will be wrapping up the meeting. I do want to say, just let the community know that the City of Kent is here. We are working as an essential business because of all of the services we provide. We do have city staff working both remotely and in the field, making sure that all of the services that you need, water, sewer, police, economic development, our park system, making sure that we're maintaining safety, even though the parks are closed. Those things are all up and running. I want to say thank you to all of our city employees that are doing those essential jobs in this time of crisis. Want to send a huge thank you out to all of our first responders, and you know, it's during a time of crisis that you realize who those first responders actually are. And it's the list of the folks that we immediately think of, fire and police, but it's our nurses and our doctors, our medical providers, our water and sewer employees. It's a significant list, and I am extremely grateful. Northwest Harvest, it's all of those folks on the front lines that are making sure that we are taking care of our community. I want to close tonight with a quote that I keep on my desk, something that I look at every day, and I think that it's actually attributed to John Lennon, and it says, "Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end." And we're working through this, and we're working through it together. I am grateful for the team that we have. I am grateful for the generosity of this community that has stepped up in a really big way to take care of each other. So with that, all I can say is we are Kent, we're strong, and we're going to get through this. And thank you, and have a good night. Stay safe and wash your hands. We are adjourned.
That's right.
Good night.
Good night.